Hello, class, and welcome to our lecture on psychological human development. Today, we will explore the fascinating world of moral and values development across the lifespan. Now, as we all know, humans are not born with fully developed moral and ethical systems. Instead, our understanding of right and wrong, good and bad, our values and beliefs are shaped by a multitude of factors throughout our lives. From childhood to adolescence and beyond, we undergo various stages of moral and values development that shape the way that we see and interact with the world around us. So in this lecture, we will delve into the theories of moral development proposed by prominent psychologists like Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan. We will explore how these theories suggest that moral reasoning and ethical decision-making abilities progress through stages, building on previous experiences and social interactions. And we will also look at how values development, which encompasses our beliefs and attitudes and personal philosophies, can be influenced by a variety of factors such as cultural upbringing, socialization, and personal experiences. We will discuss the importance of self-reflection and introspection in understanding one's own values and how they shape our interactions with the world. And additionally, we will discuss how various life experiences and events can challenge and potentially shift our moral and value systems. So, get ready for a fascinating journey as we look at psychological development across the lifespan, as we explore a deeper understanding of our beliefs and values and how we interact with the world around us. Now, in today's lecture, we will explore physical and primarily cognitive development, particularly in the childhood years. We will then explore those theories on moral development, and finally we will take a look at values-based theories of psychological development. We'll also look at some other developmental theories like psychosocial theory and whatnot, but primarily we're going to focus on the values with Erik Erikson because that's one of those ones that I feel covers the greatest range and is most practical in a course like this. But first, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about Heidi to illustrate a little bit about how people change across the lifespan. Now, Heidi's perspective on life changed over time, as is typical for people as they grow and they develop. In her childhood, Heidi had a very concrete understanding of the world around her. She was focused on her immediate surroundings and what she could see and what she could touch and what she could feel or taste. And this is consistent with Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, which suggests that children go through a sensory motor stage in which they learn about the world around them through their senses and through their motor movements. Now, as Heidi grew older, her perspective expanded beyond her immediate surroundings, and she began to develop abstract thinking skills and a greater understanding of cause and effect relationships. And this is consistent with Piaget's theory of the pre-operational stage, in which children begin to understand the world symbolically and develop in language and linguistic skills and imagination. Now, during her teenage years, Heidi's perspective was greatly influenced by her peers and her social environment. She was focused on fitting in and developing a sense of identity. And this is consistent with Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, which suggests that adolescents go through a stage of identity versus role confusion. And they are trying to figure out who they are and where they fit into the world. And in her early adulthood, Heidi's perspective shifted again as she began to take on more responsibilities and develop a greater sense of independence. She was focused on building a career, establishing relationships, and starting a family. And this is consistent with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which suggests that people are motivated by a hierarchy of needs with basic physiological needs at the bottom and self-actualization at the top. Now, as Heidi entered middle age, her perspective changed again. She began to focus more on her legacy and what she would leave behind. She was more reflective and introspective, and she placed a greater emphasis on relationships and experiences rather than material possessions. And this is consistent with Erikson's theory of generativity versus stagnation, in which people are focused on leaving a positive legacy and making a meaningful contribution to society. And finally, as Heidi entered her golden years, her perspective shifted again. She was more focused on spirituality and finding meaning in life. She was more accepting of her mortality, and was focused on making the most of the time that she had left. And this is consistent with Erikson's theory of ego integrity versus despair, in which people are focused on finding meaning and purpose in their lives and coming to terms with their own mortality. So in conclusion, here, Heidi's perspective on life changed in many ways over the course of her life, reflecting the different stages of development she went through. From a concrete understanding of the world as a child to a more abstract and introspective perspective in her later years, Heidi's life was a reflection of the developmental psychology theories that have been studied for decades. And understanding these theories can help us to understand our own perspectives on life and how they may change over time, as well as what people at different ages might be dealing with in terms of their psychological development. And so we can help them more efficiently as we work as social and community service workers. So that's a little bit of a perspective on what we'll be looking at today. So let's go on and focus in on cognitive development. Now, the cognitive development of a child from infancy to the age of 12 is a fascinating process that encompasses numerous milestones and stages. Now, during this period, children's cognitive abilities, including their ability to think and reason and solve problems, undergo some significant changes. One of the most significant and critical aspects of a child's cognitive development is what is a component known as attachment, which refers to that emotional bond between a child and their primary caregiver. Now, attachment plays a crucial role in shaping a child's emotional and social development, as well as their ability to regulate their emotions and their behaviors. In the early years of life, infants begin to form attachments with their primary caregiver, usually their mother, through a process known as bonding. Bonding involves a mutual exchange of emotions and behaviors that leads to the formation of a close emotional relationship between the infant and the caregiver. An attachment theory developed by John Bowlby suggests that secure attachment bonds are essential for healthy emotional development. A secure attachment bond provides children with a sense of safety and security, which allows them to explore their environment with confidence. And during the first 2 years of life, infants go through several stages of attachment, including pre-attachment, attachment in the making, clear-cut attachment, and reciprocal relationships. And during the pre-attachment stage, which occurs during the first few months of life, infants are not yet attached to their primary caregiver and are relatively indifferent to the presence of everybody. But during the attachment and the making process, which occurs between 2 and 7 months of age, infants begin to recognize their primary caregiver and respond differently to them than they do to others, like strangers or grandparents. And during the clear-cut attachment stage, which occurs between 7 months to 24 months of age, infants become actively attached to their primary caregiver and become actually distressed when separated from their primary caregiver. Now, finally, during the reciprocal relationship stage, which occurs after the age of 2, children develop more complex attachment relationships with their primary caregiver and are better able to manage separation and reunion with those that care for them. Now, another critical theory in the cognitive development of children is Piaget's, remember Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. According to Piaget, children's cognitive abilities develop in a series of 4 stages: the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. Now, the sensory motor stage, which occurs during the first 2 years of life, is characterized by the development of basic cognitive skills, including the ability to form mental representations, understand the cause and effect relationships, and to coordinate sensory and motor activity. During the pre-operational stage, which occurs between the ages of 2 and 7 years of age, children begin to use symbols to represent objects and ideas and develop language skills. However, their thinking is still largely centered on themselves, and they struggle with concepts such as conservation and perspective taking. That is, being able to put themselves in someone else's shoes. They have trouble with that, and they also have trouble with the idea that you can change the form of something and have it still be the same amount. Then we come to concrete operational stage, and this usually occurs between the ages of 7 and 11 years of age and is characterized by more advanced cognitive abilities, including the ability to understand concepts such as conservation and reversibility, and the ability to think logically and systematically. And finally, the formal operational stage, which occurs after the age of 11, is characterized by the development of more abstract thinking skills and the ability to think about hypothetical situations. And that's where you get into all of that complex thinking deeply about life stuff that so typically happens with teenagers, because they have just discovered this skill. It's something that's old hat to adults, but it's a new thing for someone that's 12 or 13 or 14 years old, and they're still learning about it, and so they find it very fascinating to explore in these abstract kind of ways. So in essence, the cognitive development of a child from infancy to the age of 12, it's a complex and a fascinating process, and it's clear that a 2-year-old does not think like an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old does not think like a 13-year-old. And we need to always be mindful of that. And a 13-year-old does not think like an adult. And then we come to adolescence. And adolescence here is a period of significant cognitive development, during which the individual experiences a series of transformations in their thought processes, in their personality, and in their behavior. And one of the central questions of adolescence is the question of, who am I? And it's a question that relates to identity formation and is crucial for navigating the world around them. Now, Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, that's one of the most influential theories in understanding the cognitive development of children up into adolescence. And according to Piaget, individuals move through the 4 stages of cognitive development, so from sensory motor through to pre-operational, through to concrete operational, and then finally into formal operations. And adolescence is included in that formal operational stage, characterized by that abstract thinking, by hypothetical reasoning, and by the ability to think more logically and systematically, or at least theoretically to think more logically. And within this, there's the role of assimilation and accommodation, the ability to incorporate new information into existing schemas of thought. And adolescents are often, though, experience kind of a disequilibrium, a state of cognitive imbalance resulting from the new information that they can't quite assimilate into their existing schemas. And so because they're trying to find new schemas, form new schemas, they're trying to figure all of this out. And so some will call this stage Sturm und Drang, storm and stress. And that's a part of life as well. And then finally, there's Erik Erikson, and we'll look a little bit more at Erik Erikson later on in the lecture. But for now, I just want to kind of highlight a few things. That with Erik Erikson and adolescence, he focuses on that idea of identity versus role confusion, where adolescents experiment with different identities and roles, exploring their likes and their dislikes, their values and their beliefs, trying to find a stable identity. And oftentimes they will pull from their attachment, and because they've been attached to the experiences of the primary caregiver, and that tends to form how they go about regulating their emotions, their interpersonal relationships, their sense of self, and that's something that carries on into adolescence. And then there's a theorist by the name of James Marcia, whose theory of identity development builds upon Erikson's theory, proposing 4 identity statuses for the adolescent, the degree to which basically the adolescent explores and commits to their identity formation. So these various statuses are, for example, identity diffusion, which is basically a lack of exploration or commitment to an identity, leading to confusion and apathy. There is identity foreclosure, which is a premature commitment to an identity, including which is often influenced by external factors such as family or culture. There is identity moratorium, which is active exploration of different identities without a commitment. And finally, there is identity achievement, which is a successful resolution of identity crisis and is characterized by a strong commitment to an identity. Now, in order for someone to reach identity achievement, a couple of things seem to have to happen in an adolescent's life. Number one, they need to move away from home. You can't build your own sense of commitment and try on new things if you're always following someone else's rules. You need to move away from home. And the second thing is you need to engage in caring for others in some way for a year or two at least, and struggling to find your own and build your own community that works for you. When you do those things, it seems, you are able to find that identity achieved later on in life. But remember, this identity process is something that starts in adolescence, but it is a continuous thing that goes throughout life. And what you want to do is have a sense of yourself that is strong and robust, but not rigid. It shouldn't be identity foreclosure that is you're committing your whole existence to your job, for example. Because what happens if you lose your job? Your whole life falls apart. So you need to have an identity that is complex and robust and flexible, and yet still have a commitment. So that question of who am I is a central question in adolescence. It's successful for identity formation, and I'm sure that many of you are going through that process right now in your lives. So we're going to pause there and take a bit of a break, and we will come back and explore a little bit of moral development and theories of psychological development to close out our lecture. So I will see you in a little while. You take care. Goodbye.